I want to show you how I make my negatives, how I turn a digital file into a negative and then print it out. So first of all, we're going to find the image that we want to print. I like to keep all my folders really organized, so got quite a bit of stuff in here. And I think that I want to print this one about a seagull. So let's open this up. Now, if you don't have your computer set to open things in Photoshop, this suffix here is what you want to look at. And what we can do is we can hit Control and click and either open with Adobe Photoshop, or if that's not your default, then what you can do is go to Get Info. And when this window pops up, click right here where it says Open With, and find what software you want to have be your default, and that's going to be Photoshop. And then you're going to say Change All, and it'll ask you if you want to continue. Are you sure you want to do that? And say yes. And now, when I just double click on that image, on any JPEG image for that matter, it will open up in Photoshop for me. So let me go ahead and do that. Double click, and you can see at the bottom that Photoshop is opening. You can see the icon jumping up and down there. And it's going to take just a second to open. You can do this with probably some other software, but Photoshop I think is the easiest to do it with. So if you have access to Photoshop, I would recommend doing it with that. Now, making a digital negative is, a lot of people will have all kinds of different ways to do it. There are entire systems of making digital negatives. You can get special ink for your printers. You can read all these books and take all these workshops. And those are probably really great and really help you fine-tune and really get very specific, maybe greater tonal range or really calibrate your image to exactly what you're doing. For me, I find a lot of that really confusing, to be honest, and I just don't feel like I need it that much. I'm sure there's going to be somebody out there who's going to argue with me, but you know what? I don't really care. This is the way that I like to do it. It's simple, it's pretty straightforward, and I feel like I get pretty good results. So what I do is, first thing I want to do is I'm going to desaturate the image. So I'm going to go up to Image and Image Adjustments, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find Desaturate right here. Now you can also do Command-Shift-U if you want to do that. The keystrokes make things nice and easy, but I'm going to say Desaturate, and that will make my image black and white. Okay, now I'm going to do some adjustments. I'm going to go to Adjustments, and this is another area where I feel like I break from a lot of people, where a lot of people like to use curves. I like to use levels, and what I generally try to do is just give myself a little bit more dense. This is my shadow areas, so I'll just kind of make those a little denser. If you look at the bottom of the image underneath those crates, you can see that getting much darker. So I don't really feel like I need to move that all that much, to be honest. I don't want to lose that shadow detail. These are my highlights, and you can see that blowing out quite a bit if I do that. So I probably don't want to move that all that much either. You don't want to lose highlights or details in your highlights, and you don't want to lose details in your shadows. So just be careful, watch your image, and be careful about that. Now the midtones, I'm going to might just kind of make those a little bit more dense, but not much. I really kind of like the way that image is, to be honest, right there. Okay, so I'm just going to say okay when I'm done. I think I kind of have it the way I want. Now I'm going to do that again when I make the negative, but for now that's going to be that's going to be good. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Image and Adjustments, and this time I'm going to go over here to Invert. And again, there's a keystroke for that. You can do Command-I, and usually the way I do this is with the keystroke. So I just Command-Shift-U, Command-I, Command-L gets you to levels, and I can do all of it pretty quickly with the keystrokes, but I just want to show you how you can do it through the menus there as well. So I'm going to go Invert, and now that reverses the tonality, so I have a negative image. But there's one more thing that we want to do, actually a couple more things that we want to do before we're ready to print. First of all, when you make a contact print, you want to put your negative ink side down onto the paper you're printing onto. And so you're going to reverse the orientation of the negative. So in order to do that, we're going to go to Image, and this time we're going to go to Image Rotation. And there's not a keystroke for this. So you go to Image Rotation, and we're going to flip the canvas horizontally. And so that is going to make it really truly a negative with the reversed orientation. Okay, so before I am ready to print, I am going to do Command L, or again, you can go to Adjustments and Levels, and these are all the keystrokes that you can use, so whatever you use a lot, I'd learn the keystrokes. Levels, and I want to make my image a little bit denser, or I'm sorry, I want to make my negative a little bit denser. I just know that that's going to help it print a little bit better, give me better highlights. That all looks pretty good. Now under here, this looks pretty blown out in the negative. So if you wanted to, and this is what's great about Photoshop, you can go over here and you can use some of these tools. So I might use this burn tool, like there's dodging and burning. I might maybe dodge, and I'm going to go up here and make the size of my dodging tool a little bit larger. You can also use the bracket tools on your keyboard for that. And I'm just going to maybe dodge this out a little bit so that becomes a little bit lighter. It's not really doing much. There you can see it lightening up those areas. So that's going to translate to a darker area on the print. Remember, this is a negative. Okay, so that's dodging. And I might want to burn in some areas down here. Again, I'll change the size of my brush there, and that's giving me a little bit more density. I'm just kind of clicking. You know what? I also make sure that the hardness is way down so that my edges, when I'm burning and dodging, I don't want my edges, I want those to be kind of soft. So bring the hardness down, and that way you won't see, a hard circle edge when you're doing this. Okay, so you kind of play around with that, and then once you get to where you feel like the negative is pretty good, and this takes some trial and error, and you know what? I may make a print and decide, well, I need to go back into the negative and make some areas a little more dense or a little more lighter or less dense. Okay, so now I'm ready to print. I'm going to go up to File. I'm going to go to Print, and once again, you could also do Command P, but Print is good. All right, I'm going to look at a few things here. First of all, I'm going to look and make sure that my paper size is correct. I want to print on letter size, which is 8.5 by 11, so I'm going to look there. If I wanted to change that, like let's say I wanted to print on a half letter size or maybe a larger size, go into Print Settings, and you can change your paper size here. Okay, I want to use US letter, which is 8.5 by 11, but there are all kinds of other things that you can do, and you can also create custom sizes if you like. But US letter is probably going to be the one that you use the most. I also am going to try to find the printer that I want to use, and this is the one that I want, this 3880. My Amazon order's coming in. All right, I'm going to save that, and that changes this here. Now I also you might want to change, I usually like Photoshop to manage the colors, not the printer. And then if you have the correct driver installed, then you can actually select a paper that will match the paper that you have. And I just don't have a driver on my school computer that matches. But with black and white, I think whatever I end up doing here is just fine. Okay. Now I can also change the size. If I want to scale it to fit the media so it doesn't crop anything out. Or let's say I want to make sure that I fit onto a 10-inch piece of paper, or I want my negative 10 inches, I can just change that here and just type in 10, and that will automatically change the height as well. Okay, now I'm ready to go. Everything is good the way I want it, and I'm just going to hit Print. And I can see down here that the printer is red and it sees that I sent something to it and it's ready to go. So that's how to create a negative out of a digital file. And then in the next section, I'm going to show you some different options that you have for printing on transparency, printing on paper, and even doing something called a cliche verre or drawn negative on transparency. All right, that's it. Thanks very much. All right, I printed out my negative, and here is the one that I printed out just now after doing the Photoshop work, and I put it on a piece of white copy paper so you can see it a little bit better, but this is on transparency, and this is what it looks like without the white copy paper behind it. It has nice density in these areas here that are going to be our highlights, and a really nice range of tones, and this is going to give you the clearest, crispest contact print image, okay? But if you don't have a nice inkjet printer, or you don't want to spend the money on these nice inkjet transparencies, that's totally fine. You can also do a few other things. Probably the most readily available is just going to be to print that out onto regular copy paper. So this is just a regular sheet of typing or copy paper, and I've just printed it out. It's the same exact image, the same adjustments on Photoshop. Now this actually does have some different advantages other than being more available and less expensive. Because it's so cheap, you could tear this thing apart and you could collage together different negatives pretty easily. You can draw on it, you can do some etching, and I'll show you some different ways that you can do that here in a second. And it also, because the fibers of the paper are going to print into your image, it has just a little bit different look. So it's not as crisp and clean, but you might kind of like that look. It has a little bit of a softer focus kind of feel to it because of the fibers of the paper. Okay, so some things that you can do with that are you could just draw into it with a Sharpie, just and kind of make some of these areas a little denser. Try different material, charcoal, pencil, anything that's going to give you different ranges of opacity. Something else that's kind of interesting is to try using a crayon like this and do like you would like an etching board or like one of those scratch art things. And you can, just lay down like a really thick layer of the wax like that, or you could do it on the front too, and then just take a sharp tool and etch into that, or you could even use your fingernail and get different kinds of mark making, and then that is going to create a different kind of image, something like that. Okay, so there's just different possibilities that with the paper than you have with the inkjet, the OHP transparency. All right, but one thing about this is that it's not very transparent. It's a lot more opaque. And so there's a couple things that you can do to make it more translucent, and so it will print easier and have better, shorter exposure times. All right, one way is to use vegetable oil, and this is an old beat up bottle of vegetable oil, just Crisco vegetable oil, and you would just pour the Crisco on there and rub it in. A lot of people like the vegetable oil because it's easy to find and it's cheap, and I actually don't like this very much because it's pretty messy, but that is an option, and you could use, I guess, any other kind of cooking oil that you wanted to. What I like to do is I like to use Pam cooking spray. This is my ad for Pam. All right, so what I like about Pam is that it's just easy to apply and you don't end up with this big oily mess. It's still a little oily, but definitely not like the flowing vegetable oil. So what you want to do is take your Pam, and it, for some reason other brands that I've used are not as successful. I don't know if they just have other kinds of aerosols or other formula in there, but they tend to foam up a lot, and maybe that's okay if you're cooking, but for this you don't want that. So the Pam original does seem to do the trick the best of any that I've used. All right, so I'm just going to take this Pam and I'm just going to make a nice light coat over the entire image, just like that. And then I'm going to take some paper towels, and now my goal is basically to rub as much of it off as I possibly can. So it takes a little bit of elbow grease because you really want to get it all off. First of all, make sure that you've got the entire image covered. So I might push some of this excess over here to make sure I get all of that. I don't really care if I get the whole paper because the image doesn't cover the whole paper. So I'm just going to keep rubbing it in until I get as much of it off as I possibly can. And what I usually try to do is kind of hold it in the light and see if there are still these really shiny spots. And if I see still really shiny spots, then I'm going to try to get those out. So you've got to be careful not to tear it. Although if you crunch the paper up into a ball, or just like tearing, again, you can get some different results. So just play around, right? Okay, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Now, this is going to store, you know, the inkjet transparencies you can store in a film sleeve or like a print sleeve, and it's not going to get all sticky. These might. So, you know, that's a downside, probably the biggest downside, and kind of a deal breaker for a lot of people, actually. They don't want that oily Pam cooking spray getting on stuff. I just kind of put it between a couple of other pieces of paper, and then it's really not that big a deal if I need to save it. Or because it's so cheap, I just print another one when I want to print it again. Okay, so that is getting that image a little more translucent, and I'm not sure how well that's going to translate in on the film, but it definitely, like if I hold it up to a light, I can definitely see more, I can see through that piece of paper more. All right, so that's more translucent. That's called oiled paper. Okay, now you do have a couple of other options for making transparencies or negatives that you can use to print from. They basically fall under the category of something called cliche verre, which means something like a copy on glass or to draw on glass. And so I have a couple of examples. What you would want to do is take a piece of glass, and this is a little bit dirty, but I'm just going to go ahead and use it anyway. You could wash this off if you wanted to. Just take a little India ink. Be really careful with India ink because it stains everything it touches permanently. And I'm just going to drop out a little in the center there. Now you can kind of roll it around if you want to get fancy like the old wet plate collodion guys do. You can do that. Or you can just take a brush and brush it out and just coat the entire piece of glass with the India ink. In the old days, they would have done this with candle soot. They would have just held the piece of glass over a candle back when they were made out of tallow, and all that black soot from the candle would coat the piece of glass, and then they could easily etch into the soot to make an image. So artists like Camille Corot did that, Eugene Delacroix did that. All right, and then I would let that dry. So when it dries, we'll set that off here. When it dries, you've got something like this. And then you can just take an etching needle, or you can take just a regular needle, or anything that will make a mark, and you can etch into that. And then when you make a contact print of that, everywhere you etched will be a black line, and the India ink will block it out. So that's a nice way to create drawings, and from what I've heard, that's actually the first use of photographic fine art by people like Corot and Delacroix and people like that were making fine art, because photography wasn't fine art when it first started off. But they were using this process to basically reproduce drawings, like an etching process. Okay, sometimes you can get kind of interesting effects too. The way that this got in there, I'm going to see if I can kind of get closer to the camera and show you that. That left some interesting marks, just the way it dried. So, you know, you could kind of do some interesting things with that, and then maybe lay that over an image and just, you know, something abstract, or to create kind of a, almost like a filter that you might put, you know, in Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. You put a filter on there. Okay, so that's the glass, the cliche verre. That's like literally cliche verre. But you could also use just regular pieces of plastic acetate. That would work, and maybe Sharpie or some other kind of paint on there. And then you could make an image that way, or even just tracing paper. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you can make an image that you can then use to do contact printing. It just depends on what you want to do, the different effects that you want, what kind of print you want, and there's endless ways that you can combine these things. So, you know, my mantra is play, experiment, try it again, and just, you know, see what kinds of things you can come up with for your practice. All right, that's all it is. Thanks.